from chapter 4, verse 11. At that time, this people in Jerusalem will be told, a scorching wind from the barren heights in the desert blows toward my people, but do not winnow or cleanse. A wind too strong for that comes from me. Now I pronounce my judgment against them. Verse 14. Jerusalem, wash the evil from your heart and be saved. How long will you harbor wicked thoughts? Then on to verse 18. Your own conduct and actions have brought this on you. This is your punishment. How bitter it is, how it pierces to the heart. Now verses 22 through 28. My people are fools. They do not know me. They are senseless children. They have no understanding. They are skilled in doing evil. They do not know how to do good. I looked at the earth, and it was formless and empty, and at the heavens, and their light was gone. I looked at the mountains, and they were quaking, and all the hills were swaying. I looked, and there were no people. Every bird in the sky had flown away. I looked, and the fruitful land was a desert. All its towns lay in ruin before the Lord, before his fierce anger. This is what the Lord says. The whole land will be ruined, though I will not destroy it completely. Therefore the earth will mourn, and the heavens above grow dark, because I have spoken and will not relent. I have decided and will not turn back. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
It's been a pretty hard sermon to write because the theme of it is what happens to us when we try to live without God in our lives. I find it a dark and serious subject. It is a proposition that's hard to contemplate and therefore it's hard to talk about. And what prompted me to choose this subject was immersing myself in the imagery presented from our lectionary offering from Jeremiah chapter 4, verses 23 through 26. Now listen to these words and see if they do not make you feel empty and hollow and sad, or maybe even a little bit queasy. I looked at the earth, and it was formless and empty. At the heavens, and their light was gone. I looked at the mountains, and they were quaking. All the hills were swaying. I looked, and there were no people. Every bird in the sky had flown away. I looked, and the fruitful land was a desert. All its towns lay in ruins before the Lord, before his fierce anger. Now to me, this is an image of a land without God. It is a metaphor for a soul that does not know the comfort, the love, and the support of God. I think it is where we finally, ultimately end up when we forsake the Lord. Now, you know me, I'm a natural optimist, so it's hard for me to accept that kind of wasteland described here to be the fate of any person, any community, any world. And I write this was coming off the ends of my fingers, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not sure I can stand this. And then it was at this depressing point of writing this sermon on Friday that the rain came pouring down in torrents. And I decided to walk out into the narthex and watch the rain for a few minutes through the front doors, because it was falling in sheets. It was coming down like almost solid, it seemed like. But then I was attracted into this sanctuary. And in here, you can hear the rain beat on the roof. And suddenly, I felt happy and comforted. It reminded me, of course, when I was a boy. It's no surprise to my daughter, I'm sure. I was about 12 or 13. And my dad had a pickup truck with a camper shell on the back. It was a green 1973 Chevy, I think. And when it would rain on a summer evening, my brother and I would grab our sleeping bags and a pillow and run out to that truck, dodging the raindrops when it was in the evening, and climb in the back and spend the night listening to the rain beating on the roof of that camper shell, and we would talk about life And what were our plans for tomorrow? And what were our plans for the next day? We love to listen to that rhythm, that tattoo of water droplets hitting the camper shell. And I think it was because we felt safe and warm, and we could sense that we were protected by that impervious barrier to that falling water. And I felt the same feeling of protection when I walked in the sanctuary on that Friday morning and I heard the rainfall. It made me realize that this roof is like our God. It protects us from the elements, just as our faith, our God, protects us from all that's out there that would destroy us, including ourselves. Now, verse 11 tells us that a scorching wind will blow, and it will do more than winnow or cleanse. It will be a destructive force. And we're given to understand that this destruction comes upon the kingdom of Judah because the people do not follow the rules that God lays down for them. They worship foreign gods. It is as if they have torn down the walls and collapsed the roof of their abode, and now the wind and the elements are allowed access to their lives. In fact, in the end, the Babylonians came from the north and rained devastation on the kingdom of Judah, carrying the people away to servitude in Babylon. And when they were in Babylon, they were told that they must sing the songs that they sang when they were in Jerusalem to their gods, or to their God. And the song, it talks about this actually in the 137th Psalm. And there is a song that goes, by the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept, for thee, Zion, thee, remember thee, Zion. And so you can see and maybe feel in that tune, in that music, how sad everyone was about what had happened to them and the total destruction of what happened to them when they lived without God. And I think this kind of destruction is not just applicable to Judah in the 6th century before Christ's coming. We can see examples of it in history, especially the history of the 20th century. Probably the most destructive century in the history of humankind. We didn't only look at the Second World War to think of desolation that was created when the fascist power of Germany not only reached deep into the well of nihilism, but tried to pervert the church to its own ends and ultimately rained down destruction that nearly consumed an entire continent. And what happened when Marxist powers basically outlawed Christianity within their boundaries? It may at least have been partly the loss of the moderating influence of Christianity that allowed for the Gulag Archipelago, slave labor camps in the Soviet Union, where 3 to 8 million people died, as well as the Cultural Revolution in China, where at least 2 million people lost their lives. These are historical examples of what happened when people tried to live without God. In verse 18 of our reading, we understand the Lord saying, your own conduct and actions have brought this on you. This is your punishment. How bitter it is, how it pierces the heart. What is it that God is telling us here? Is God the cause of all the destruction that comes down upon us when we forsake God? When we try to live without God? This is a hard question. And it leads us to ponder God's role with regard to evil in the world. And my own understanding is that we have a determinist God. Though God wants nothing but good for us, it is our actions and our own wandering from God that aligns us with what God knows will happen. As this verse tells us, our own sin and the evil that springs from it is bitter. Yes, it is bitter. It does pierce us to the heart, but I think this passage is also telling us that it pierces our God to his heart. So when we wander from God, we strain our relationship with God, not from God's side, but from our side. And we can see this from a practical perspective in verse 22. My people are fools. They do not know me. They are senseless children. They have no understanding. They are skilled in doing evil. They do not know how to do good. And we can see this by considering what happens when we decide to stop obeying the simple rules that God has laid out for us. We could take just a few of the Ten Commandments, just as we did in the children's sermon. Number 10, when we covet things, which I think Karen mentioned, it's a sin. And I should clarify what coveting is and what coveting is not. Coveting is not seeing a nice bicycle that someone has and think that you would like to have one too. Coveting is seeing that bicycle and thinking about how you could ride off with that particular one if you could cut the bike lock off with a bolt cutter while the owner's inside a coffee shop on 2nd Avenue. Such thoughts lead to action, which lead us to another commandment, the 8th, do not steal. And if we all stole, as we talked about in the children's sermon, what kind of dog-eat-dog world would we end up living? And all this by breaking down our relationships with God and with each other. And this picture of a wasteland that Jeremiah paints is not merely a physical reality. It becomes a spiritual reality for us as well. For when we give up on God, our lives become empty and meaningless, and this is the very definition of nihilism. When we think we can do without God, we find that without our relationship with our Creator, that we are driven to acquire and experience things that can never fulfill us. While in God we may find all the comfort and love that we need to sustain us through the good times and the bad times. So in essence, when we forsake God, we are the ones who end up creating the wasteland. The wasteland in which we may live, the wasteland in which could be our souls. In verse 27 and 28 we can read, the whole land will be ruined, though I will not destroy it completely. Therefore the earth will mourn, and the heavens above grow dark. But even should the worst happen, not everything will be destroyed. That's what this passage is telling us. Because no matter how bad we ourselves may screw things up, God still extends a hand to us. No matter how hard we try to sever our relationship with God, God remains in relation with us, whether we want to be in relation or not. God will continue to offer to be our God. Now, the last two lines of our reading sound ominous and harsh. They do. God says, I have spoken and will not relent. I have decided and will not turn back. But what is it that God will not relent from? What is it that God will not turn back from? Is it the destruction of Israel? Is it the destruction of God's people? Is it our own destruction? God charted a course for the universe when God spoke the world into existence. God made a covenant with Noah and made a covenant with the Israelites when they left Egypt. God made a covenant with us when God sent Jesus Christ to redeem us. I think here we might understand that God is not going to relent, will not turn back from us. God will not give up on us. And if we look back in history, we can see that this is surely true. Christ came after the writings that we are reading here and the events of Jeremiah's time. God continues to give us chance after chance, and I think God is indeed like that camper shell on the back of my dad's pickup truck when I was a boy. We were protected from the wet. We were protected from the cold. We were comforted in the knowledge that because that roof was over our heads, that we could weather the storm. Yes, God is like this roof over our heads right now. It shelters us from the wind and the rain, and it will shelter us from the heavy snows of the northern winters. Even if we run out from under it, it will still be there, always up there, over our heads, and protecting us as long as we are willing to remain under it. Now, please put yourselves in a posture for prayer. Eternal God, in spite of our sin, in spite of our wanderings from you, you remain in relationship with us. We may weather the storm and go out from under your roof. We may stray far from you, but we know you are always there with us to protect us. Whenever we forget you, wherever we ignore your call to us, whether it is a physical place or in our hearts, it becomes a barren waste. Lord, lead us to your bountiful garden, that we may live in peace and harmony with ourselves, with each other, and with the world.